emitters are coming from, and I think there are two places. I think they have to be in the vicinity. I do not buy into this, oh, it's all just satellites things. The best of my knowledge currently is that we're all totally filled with chips on our scalp, in our brain. And then we have emitters placed at neighbors, amplifying units and emitters at neighbors. But also, the case of Philip Kerr's MI5 shows that these emitters are also placed inside walls or between, floors. So Philip Kerr found big metallic cans of electronics right above his bed, I think, under the floorboards of his attic.
I think that very same thing is in the floorboards of my attic, and my attic is a little dicey to get up there, but I think I should at some point. Because I literally hear what sounds like the row of cans across the floor above my head.
Robotic units.
Yeah, seriously, and it's all tracking devices, so when these, local upstairs tracking thingies can't quite get a hold of me, I start hearing them rolling back and forth, in a robotic way. And then at the same time, I hear the cars zooming up and down, which they do all the time. So,
actually, maybe the death dimension in this context, now that we mentioned satanic cults and also the COINTELPRO harassment and the assaults against the American population, is the death or murder, rather the murder of Ted Gunderson. And at this point, I would like to point people very briefly. He is famous, so people can find lots of information on him. But I would like to point everybody to his affidavit. So Ted Gunderson's affidavit, you can find online by just searching. So Ted Gunderson affidavit, you will get to this document. And, before he was murdered, he published this document where he put it in writing what's currently happening. But he also said that, I firmly believe, so point 6 is very important, I firmly believe that most individuals working in the FBI and other intelligence agencies and the government overall are honest, law-abiding public servants. However, a sophisticated network of rogue operatives has secretly infiltrated the FBI, other intelligence agencies, including the CIA, and other key government positions. This rogue element seeks personal power and wealth and considers themselves above the law and the Constitution. They are carrying out the aforementioned surveillance and harassment activities in conjunction with organized crime. In conjunction with organized crime. Now, this is from a seasoned FBI, head of the FBI person, says that this rogue network is tied to organized crime. Well, the only correction I have to that is this network is organized crime. But he also says the cult movement in America, including satanic cults, right? So this network is carrying out the satanic cults and other commercial and political interests, and even misguided civic organizations and neighborhood groups, as in the neighborhood Nazi programs, This illegal surveillance and harassment program is being called gang stalking and organized stalking by the victims targeted by it. Victims are targeted for a variety of reasons, including government and corporate whistleblowers, parties to financial and employment disputes, parties to marital disputes, usually divorced women, and even jilted paramours. Journalists covering controversial issues, and even attorneys and private investigators representing unpopular clients or interests have been targeted by this program. Yes. So that affidavit can be quoted in court, and when you prove that this system is global, you can also use Ted Gunderson's affidavit here in Europe.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. That's actually a very brilliant and very important affidavit, and Ted Gunderson as well. He actually whistleblew also about chemtrails, and one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that we are filled up with chips. Well, we're all filled up with nanochips and with little nanobots and ourselves. Not just those who think that they're being targeted electromagnetically, but literally everybody living under the sky with our raining down. So that's how all of humanity is targeted. Certainly every American is targeted.
And talking about every person being targeted, the one category of targets we have left out so far are VIPs. There was some VIPs here, Dr. Onikilde, but really government officials and heads of intelligence and heads of the military themselves. And I just would like to finish, from my side on that matter by pointing to one very, very big important case, a case of, mass murder here. I would like to share my screen, and I would draw people's attention to the mass murder of government officials, Polish government officials, in the 2010, Polish Air Force Tu-154 crash. This crash was not normal; it was mass murder, and I endeavored to prove this to you. And I also say that this crash, on the surface of it, because the crash happened near the city of Smolensk, which is again, Russia. So everybody, the first thing people said in these so-called conspiracy theories is that, Russia might have, done something because it was above their ground. But I would say, as a systems analyst with just half a brain, you can prove that the crash of this Polish Air Force plane indicates deep capture, and it indicates high treason inside the Polish establishment. So I would like to put it to you that these people were actually murdered by high-up people in the military and the intelligence agencies within Poland. And that's what makes it just so explosive, because no one talks about it in these terms, but it's very, very clear to see. And I've tried to prove it to you why you can draw this conclusion. And I would like to draw your attention to the passenger list. Look at the victims who died, because that says it all. Even if you know absolutely nothing about the detailed forensics of this plane crash, just look at the passenger list. It literally, I can use just that, I believe, to prove it to you, because among the victims were the president of Poland, Lech Kaczynski, and his wife Maria, the former president of Poland in exile, the chief of the Polish general staff and other senior Polish military officers, the president of the National Bank of Poland, Polish government officials, and 18 members of the Polish parliament, senior members of the Polish clergy, and relatives of the victims of the Tetyn massacre. Okay, now if you scroll down, let's hear this again, because there's some people missing from this list. If you go down and you look, this is, by the way, this is the Wikipedia page, okay? So just by looking at Wikipedia, you can prove high treason in the Polish establishment. If you go to section 5, notable passengers, you will find the list again. So let's say it again slowly. We have the president of Poland and his wife on the plane, right? We have the former last president of Poland on this plane, and on board the very same plane were the military chiefs of staff of the army, the Air Force, and the Navy. The governor of the National Bank was there, the deputy foreign minister, the head army chaplains of the Catholic and Orthodox churches, and the head of the National Security Bureau. I presume this is the head of Intel. All right, and then 3 deputy parliament speakers, the head of the Olympic Committee, civil rights commissioner, right, and at least 2 presidential aides. Okay, and widely known national lawmakers. Okay, so I say, just by looking at this list, I can prove to you that the murderers, this was a murder, and the murderer is actually inside the Polish government, the military, and the intelligence agencies, just by looking at the passenger list. And how can you do that? It's the simple fact, right? I am not in intelligence or in security, but it's pretty clear to me that if you fly anybody anywhere, you don't put all these people on the same freaking plane, because it can be shut down, right? So no way do you put the chiefs of staff of the army, the military, what was that? Sorry, the army, the navy, and the air force, the head of Intel, the bank governor, the president, and the former president. What? What happened? Where were the security? Were there any security considerations? Instead, you have literally the entire government going onto the plane, Vamos a la playa style. Hey, what happened? Were these people literally all neurotagged when they went on the plane? Because what I would expect, if you're the chief of staff of the military, or, the Air Force or the Navy, especially if you're the head of Intel, as soon as you get on a plane, you sit down and you think, hang on a second, even if you hadn't been told who's in a plane, you think, hang on, that's the president, hi. Oh, the former president, hi. Oh, here are my colleagues from all the members of the military and the head of, I'm the head of Intel, and I'm on the same plane as all these people, and the governor of the National Bank of Poland. the first thing I would expect is this guy, as soon as his little tushy touches the seat, to go, oh, hang on, let me get off the plane and get my suitcase. Oh, sir, but your suitcase is here. Not that one, the other suitcase. Oh, but sir, you only had one suitcase. Give that to me. You know, I'll be galloping down the stairs of this thing. I mean, no way do you have the head of Intel climbing into the same plane. What happened here? Like, how is this possible? Even if you have the chief of the military and the head of Intel totally Eurotech, are there not people around to go, sir, do you really think it's a good idea to go to this event in Russia? I mean, we're in Poland, we're flying to Russia, and we're all flying on the same plane? Would it not be just so amazingly coincidental if the plane crashed and we all died? You know, but how can this be? You know, how can this possibly be? So what this implies is either the people who are now leading the militaries and the intelligence agencies are totally stupid and have been child sacrifice parties for the last 20 years and know absolutely nothing, like even less than me, about national security and defense, right? Either they're totally stupid, or they were totally Eurotech, or they're stupid, they were Eurotech, and the people who were there to actually watch over them, the top of the militaries and intel that were left after the death of these people, betrayed them. High treason. And if you're looking for the people who committed high treason, it's the people who should have, flagged this up as the most stupid thing on earth to do. But I mean, how the hell did we get to this stage and why has not a single national newspaper pointed out the simple fact that you can just get from Wikipedia that this is just insane? I mean, did I just dream that, or did the crash really happen? Or are all the people actually taken off to I don't know, Epstein's, what's it called, Lolita Island, and they're having a good time and they're actually all alive? I mean, I want to know what's happening.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you brought up, Catherine. I'm so glad you brought that issue to light, and definitely it's something to cover. I don't know which. I have a feeling that there's been some coverage on it, including some mention of how shockingly coincidental it appears to have been. But I wanted to also point out that we've kind of gone beyond the time that we set for ourselves today. And it's kind of at the point where we have to kind of think of closing. So we will revisit the subject that you just opened, in succeeding shows, definitely. And I think this particular show has been a good opener to talk about honoring the memories and the actions and activism and work of all of those great people who've come before us and who've been whistleblowing and giving evidence about these programs of mass surveillance and mass surveillance crime rolling that we're all facing today. So on that note, that's sort of my last word for today. But if we want to go around and just issue a few last words and close.
Okay.
Millicent, did you want to say a few last things in closing today? I think your mic is off, Millicent. You have to unclick the mic icon. Can't hear you.
Actually did a vote for those who are still living that have been with us since the early years, and at least for me, of targeting back in 2003, I found Julianne McKinney, I found Ellen very helpful in giving and things like that. I also found Show Well, what was actually going on. Linda Sedala actually wrote a letter, as you will know, targeted. Lynn Sedala is a former Lockheed Martin scientist, was the past vice president of the United States Psychotronic Association. Eleanor White was a communications engineer. I already told you all about the title of Julianne McKinney. Cheryl Welsh is now a lawyer in Davis, California. And there was a television reporter on her back in the late 90s, I think. Remember them as well. They're still with us. We're so glad they are valuable. In during the early years, the understanding. that goes.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're exactly right. There are a lot of people who've come before us, and they've done years and years and years and years of work, and they've just burned out, and I don't blame them, but they have contributed immensely. You know, we would be nowhere near where we are today without them. You're entirely correct.
Yes, and I guess I would like to finish. My finishing words are addressed. I would like to speak to absolutely everyone, but my finishing words are actually addressed. To this guy. I would like to address my parting words to the KGB major Boris Karpichkov here, who made these claims about Gareth Williams being murdered by Russian hitmen. And, as you probably have figured out by now, the death of Gareth Williams is rather close to my heart. This is the one of Aaron Schwartz. And I just would like to say to Major Karpichkov that, he should be very careful, with his colleagues in MI6, with whom he's currently working, as it seems, because, these men have a habit of taking Russians and leading them up the garden path. And if Major Karpichkov doesn't believe me, I'm sure he can talk to Vladimir Putin, who I think has a good idea about being double-crossed by the British. So my advice to Major Karpichkov is to maybe start doing what all intelligence agents should start doing now, which is use their own intelligence and their own brain to think for themselves, as opposed to just, being taken by the hand and being led up the garden path into the biggest shitstorm of the 21st century by a group of people who I can only call a bunch of absolutely limp-wristed sodomites. So that's for me.
On which note, I guess we'll have to call it a day and revisit these, tantalizing subjects another morning. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
For you. people are going to see that, and they're going to think that you're weak. And a lot of people, I'm not saying everybody, I'm just saying a lot of people will take advantage of that. So confidence is everything in life. I'm not talking to just the general people on my tubes. I'm talking to a specific individual. You know who you are. We had this chat the other day. I'm just being honest. I'm a nobody, dude. For real. I'm just a nobody. But I'm just saying, confidence is everything. It's good for you. It's healthy. That's all I'm saying. You don't have to be like nasty cocky about it. You know, to be confident in life is healthy. You're going to make it. You know what I'm saying? If you're not confident, you make it at all. Just tell them the facts. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just being honest. So anyway, Monty's working on the new one. We got the memory song done. Matter of fact, there's a drummer still got to write more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's Big Ball of Wax.
Yeah.
Please, by all means, chime in. I'm on it. Simply not free.
Welcome to For the People. I just watched a video and it just left me just feeling really down, scared. Well, not scared. Well, it just... Anyway, so why am I sharing it, right? Do I want you guys to feel scared and down? No, I don't. But the thing is, you need to see it. And one of my subscribers, he gave me this other video, this link, and I didn't really watch it because he was telling me, you know, when I did the one about the silent weapons that I just did today, and he said, oh, that's nothing. They've been using stuff like that on me forever, blah, blah, blah. And then he gave me a link to a video, and without watching it, I just said, okay, well, I'll put that link in for the other people, you know, in the description box. So I went back to that video about the stealth weapons, and I inserted it so that people who wanted to know more about these things, the mind control and the psychic weapons and all that, so they would know. But I didn't watch it. I just put the link in there. And then later, I went back to my comments, and he had commented on something else, and he said something else, and he left another link. And I said, well, let me watch this one. And I clicked on it. And I watched it, and I was like, well, the title of it is Victims Unknowingly Implanted with RFID Chips. Now, years ago, I did one about that woman, that black woman that was unwittingly implanted with the RFID chip in her vagina. But I'm sure everybody's seen that one by now. And she had to go to the Supreme Court to get help. And I still don't even know if she got help. But anyway, so when I watched the one that he left, the last one that he left, and I watched it, it just blew me away. Why? Because it showed that way back in the 70s when Clinton was president, and even before Clinton was president, they were doing this mind control stuff, you know, and with the implants. I thought the implants were something new, because when I started doing these videos 3 years ago, I didn't know anything about RFID chips. They hadn't even started calling them RFID chips. I don't, you know? So it was just mind-blowing that way back in the 20th century, they were secretly implanting people with these things. So I watched it, and it showed how, you know, you go to the dentist or you go to the doctor and they implant you without you knowing it. And they were showing how all these people, now this was way back in the 20th century, mind you, how these people were being chipped way back then. So you can imagine what's happening now. Now, we're breathing the stuff in. Anyway, they were showing how they were trying to help people, and like a lot of the people were tortured by these things they were implanted with. Like, and now many of us are starting to be, well, not tortured, well, you could call it torture, because we're ending up with all these different diseases and aches, and you know, like the nanobites, when we had like they were spider bites and they weren't, and they were painful and this and that, and you know, and all these people with Morgellons and stuff. This stuff has been going on longer than I knew. This stuff has been going on back in the 20th century. They were doing this. So now, oh my goodness, all of us, we might be cyborgs and not even know it, according to all this stuff they're doing to us. And well, the one that I saw, and I'm going to leave the link for you so you can see it, way back in the 20th century, and Clinton got up and gave a speech. Yeah, Bill Clinton. And he gave a speech, and he was saying how it's wrong to do this to people without their knowledge, and blah, 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 and, you know, it's not going to happen again, and we're going to do something about it. Well, here we are in the 21st century, and it's worse than ever. So what in the hell? So that was back when people didn't know Clinton was a drug addict and a liar and a killer and all kind of stuff. So I guess people believed him. And when he said it, he was saying like he wanted to help the people, and this was wrong and you shouldn't be doing it. I'm like, what the hell? And then on top of it, Joe Biden talked about it. Yeah, this is wrong. And Joe Biden now is known as Creepy Biden, a pedophile. And Clinton's a pedophile too. Oh my God. So yeah. So yeah, I was upset when I saw this. I said, shit, is this the Twilight Zone or what? I'm thinking all this RFID chipping and stuff this is nothing new. It's nothing new. They've been doing stuff to us without our knowledge for I don't know how long. Oh, what now? What next? Oh my goodness. So anyway, in this video that I'm going to leave for you that I watched, they were showing how they have this thing that they can run across your body, and it'll beep, you know, like a Geiger counter or something that can tell you where the chips are in your body. But most of the people that they were doing that with already knew, because they were having problems and they were having pain, or, you know, they were being tortured by these things in their bodies. And for years. Oh my goodness. So anyway, and they were telling you how you need to go and, well, basically they were doing it so that they could go to court and prove that they had these implants inside their bodies, and it had been done without their permission. That's what the whole thing was about. They were trying to get enough evidence to go to court to help these people and to stop this from ever happening again. So that's why I'm upset, because way back in the 20th century, they went through all that to help people stop this from going on, when it's still going on. Bill Clinton got up and lied and said, oh, we're not going to never let... They never stopped. And creepy Joe Biden, oh my goodness, they never stopped. So now, here we are in the 21st century, and it's rampant. It's worse than ever. We can't trust it. Well, we know we can't trust anybody. So who can you believe? Nobody. So now that we are all chipped, but in a different way now. We're breathing in this stuff. We're drinking it. It's in our food. This is just... I don't even know what to do anymore. I don't even know. Because there's Nobody you can call on to help. Trump is not helping us. Trump is not helping us with this. He knows about it. They all know about it. So who can help us? God? Well, anyway, I will leave the link for you. And also, afterwards, after I watched that, I did go back to the other link that this guy left that I put in the description box under the video I did today about the stealth weapons. I went back and I started watching that, and I was like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And I haven't finished watching that because I stopped watching it and then I went. Anyway, but what I did see when I watched that one, and you should go back and watch that one also, because it showed that it's not just the weapons. It's not just the microwave weapons. They've got people who can do this with their minds, like psychics, psychic attacks. That's what they're calling it, psychic attacks. This is like, what the hell? It's no wonder any of us are still alive with all this stuff they're doing to us and the stuff that they're capable of doing. This is insane. I may never be the same again. This is messed up. So if you feel like it, go back to that video I did today, because I put that one in the description box about the psychic attacks they're doing on us. And then right now, this one, I'm going to leave a link for this one that I'm talking about right now, about them implanting us without our knowledge, which they've been doing since the 20th century. Oh my goodness. Oh gee. And I was thinking, okay, well, way back then when they were implanting people without their knowledge, because I'm thinking now that both Hillary and Bill are artificial life forms. So they've been killed and cloned, but they're still walking around here like they're alive. So it's, oh man. Oh God. Okay. All right. Peace and love.
International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies. That's ICAACT.org, ISAACT.org. Our mission is to bring attention and public awareness on a worldwide scale to the general population about the abuses of covert electronic terrorism. Along with myself, and through the help of two fellow technicians, we began our international testing and survey on a global basis. I'd like to introduce Peter Rosenhall.
Hi, my name is Peter Rosenhall. I'm with the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. Right now we're conducting scans across the US and Europe.
And next I'd like to introduce Lars Drugard.
Hello, my name is Lars. I'm from Denmark in Europe, and I'm going to do the testing in Europe, more specifically in Germany. Here's a little video clip of Jesse explaining the 3 phases of the testing.
Thank you for coming. My name is Jesse Belcher. I'm a retired Sacramento City firefighter paramedic. And basically what we're going to be doing today is what is called radio frequency scanning. So I'm going to go ahead and explain how it works. Okay, there's 3 phases to this. There's a preliminary scan, And what that is we check for radio frequency emissions utilizing what is called the JM20 Pro radio frequency detector. And if you come up positive on that, we'll use a frequency counter, which will give us the frequency that it is picking up or emitting on. Okay? So phase 2 requires this. If you come up positive on the scan, you're still going to need the medical imaging. So you're going to have to obtain an X-ray, an MRI, or a CT, depending on what. But most of the time, you probably only need an X-ray, which is very affordable. It's about between $60 and $80. Okay, and we can help you, guide you to where you need to go to get that done. Okay, but that's the part that needs to happen on phase 2. Phase 3 is we need to go in a controlled environment and do further testing, so that when we go to court, we can say we're 100% absolutely positive that this person, this human being, is emitting an RF frequency, because we do this in a Faraday cage, and the Faraday cage will block out certain frequency ranges that we're testing for that we know that are associated with RFID chips. And the purpose here is to give you evidence. Okay. Because if you want doctors, anyone in the medical field, the scientific community, or the law enforcement, or even those in politics, or those in positions of power, even pastors, for example, you really need evidence. Because if you go and tell them the story, it's just a story to them. Okay? And they're going to think you're nuts. That's the bottom line. I hate saying that, but that's the truth. And that's what those who are doing this to us want to happen. They want us all to be labeled crazy, so you lose all rights. Okay?
The following are the results of our tour when we started our radio frequency scanning across America in Sacramento, California. Here are some test results that came up positive of victims of domestic terrorism. This is Christopher, 5 years old. Positive in his left shoulder area. He also came up positive in his right scapula area. His father states this was done to him in a dental office when he received a shot. Our next victim, who came up positive for domestic terrorism, is Bonnie Kellerby. Bonnie has been a victim for over a decade. She came up positive for RF transmission in her right TMJ. In addition, she came up positive near her left TMJ. She also tested positive for RF transmission on her left and right shoulder region. The following who came up positive is David Gonzalez. David came up positive in his right shoulder region. Our next victim is Richard Northern. Richard Northern has been a victim for over 20 years. Richard Northern came up positive for RF transmission near his left TMJ area. This is Barbara. Barbara flew in from out of the country to have an RF scan. Barbara has been tortured over the years in many ways, what most women call a silent rape. She came up positive in her lower lumbar, her lower back area. She can pinpoint with needlepoint accuracy where she believes an implant is, and you can see by our RF testing it comes up positive. Another area that Barbara complained with pinpoint accuracy was the back of her neck, and sure enough we came up with positive radio frequency emission in our preliminary scan.
In Europe, we started the testing tour in the German capital, Berlin, where I met up with the Swedish lawyer Dr. Henning Witte, who was going to interview the victims while I was doing the testing. The first person tested was Waldemar. He tested positive in both sides in the TMJ area. Noch tiefer. Von der Antenne weg. Next up was Monica. Monica tested positive in her right TMJ area. So, Antenne wieder hin. Und die Antenne weg. Ja, 2 Antenne wieder hin. Sieht man das auf dem... Ist da was? Ja. Here I'm testing Gisela. Gisela came up positive in the TMJ area on both sides. Sieht man das?
Man hört es vor allem, jetzt sieht man es auch, ja. Das ist eindeutig.
She also came up positive in her lower back. I tested both Gisela's children and they both came up positive. This is the testing of Sabine. Sabine came up positive in her right TMJ area.
Nee, veränder du mal deinen Arm überhaupt nicht, Lars. Geh mal jetzt wieder weg. Nichts verändern, Lars. Zurück.
Sabine also tested positive on her back at the left shoulder area.
Jetzt wieder weg. Wieder zurück. Noch näher ran. Ja, das ist doch ziemlich eindeutig. Wieder weg.
The following are victims of domestic terrorism who came up positive on radio frequency scans on our tour through Chicago, Illinois. Our first victim is Angela. Angela came up positive on her left temporal area. Our next victim is Sandrea. Sandrea came up positive in her right temporal region. In addition, she came up positive on her right shoulder for emission of radio frequency. Our next victim is Mike. His torture began at approximately age 19. He came up positive in his right temporal region. Mike also came up positive in his left temporal area.
We ended our European testing tour in Hamburg in northern Germany. In Hamburg, this young man came up positive in his left TMJ area. Und dann bist du wieder weg davon. Ran. Ja. Wieder Signal. Weg davon.
As we continued our testing across the United States, our next stop was Kenosha, Wisconsin. In Kenosha, Wisconsin, we had several people come up positive. Our first victim is Debbie. Debbie had complained of being a victim of domestic terrorism for many years. She suffered from... Debbie came up positive for radio frequency transmission in our preliminary testing near her right flank area. Our next victim is Lisa. Lisa, just as Debbie, has been complaining of being tortured for many years. Lisa came up positive near her left temporal region, just above her ear, and she came up positive near her right temporal area. Lisa gave testimony at the Presidential Bioethics Commission.
Dr. Francis Collins is the director of the National Institutes of Health.
Let me just say a word, though, about neuroimaging. Certainly the problem of incidental findings, though, is an enormous, obvious overlap with the genetic situation. MRI scans often give things you didn't expect, and often they're things you don't know what to do with. UBOs, as they're called, unidentified bright objects. Do you want to have one of those in your brain? Well, you might, and what are you going to do with that? Very difficult to say.
My name is Lisa Becker. I am also from Wisconsin. I have been a non-consenting test subject in military medical research. I'm asking you to help initiate a congressional investigation. We've all come a long way. This is what is needed. We want to have the accounts of this extreme human rights abuse that's going on in our country documented and heard, all of the accounts.
I've been a human subject for experimentation for almost 2 years, and I've contacted Dr. Hall. I stand with a very large group. Excuse me, I'm very nervous, but I'm very tired of having my rights taken away, and thank you for hearing me.
Dr. John Hall.
My name is Dr. John Hall. I'm a medical doctor from Texas. As a physician, relative to some of what you're hearing today, in the community, we are seeing an alarming rate of complaints of use of electromagnetic weapons, microwave auditory effects, silent sound spectrum, EEG cloning, which has taken the lab out of the laboratory and into the home. Most of these, from the research that we've reviewed, can be done remotely. It seems to be more weapons research than medical research.
I'd like to speak about what this all means. Currently, in our preliminary testing, we're finding that between 30 and 40% of individuals are coming up positive, emitting a radio frequency emission. If another human being was to impede on another person's body, it would be considered rape. And rape would never be called a misdemeanor. This type of intrusion on any human being is no different. In addition, I have a colleague who ran for California Assembly, District 9 here in Sacramento County. He was a former Marine. When we took him various pieces of evidence, he says that our military utilized this technology on prisoners caught in Afghanistan. They were captured, put unresponsive, and injected with an RFID device. Then they were let go or allowed to escape. They used this for reconnaissance information. What this means is this technology sends and receives information. This technology destroys everything that this country is about. It destroys freedom of speech, freedom to practice religion in privacy. It destroys attorney-client privilege, due process. What this means is, how can you implement due process if there's no attorney-client privilege? This type of technology destroys our civil liberties, our Constitution, and the foundations of our government in one fell swoop. Under the Patriot Act, Section 802, it was extended to further define domestic terrorism. Prior to that, it only addressed international terrorism. This technology falls under domestic terrorism. What this means as far as implications on society, not only here in the United States, but globally, is this impedes on the very definition of what a human being is. This impedes and leads to complete control over a person. Freedoms, thoughts, the way we define ourselves as humans is completely destroyed. When you take away the ability of an individual to reject the possibility of having an implant of an RFID device. What you are saying that is they are no different than animals.
This report I received today is a monumental document in more ways than one. But it is a very, very important piece of America's history, and it will shape America's future in ways that will make us a more honorable, more successful, and more ethical country. What this committee learned, I would like to review today with a little more detail than Dr. Faden said, because I think it must be engraved on our national memory. Thousands of government-sponsored experiments did take place at hospitals, universities, and military bases around our nation. The goal was to understand the effects of radiation exposure on the human body. While most of the tests were ethical by any standards, some were unethical, not only by today's standards, but by the standards of the time in which they were conducted. They failed both the test of our national values and the test of humanity. Informed consent means your doctor tells you the risk of the treatment you are about to undergo. In too many cases, informed consent was withheld. Americans were kept in the dark about the effects of what was being done to them. The deception extended beyond the test subjects themselves to encompass their families and the American people as a whole. For these experiments were kept secret, and they were shrouded not for a compelling reason of national security, but for the simple fear of embarrassment, and that was wrong. So today, on behalf of another generation of American leaders and another generation of American citizens, the United States of America offers a sincere apology to those of our citizens who were subjected to these experiments, to their families, and to their communities. When the government does wrong, we have a moral responsibility to admit it. The duty we owe to one another to tell the truth and to protect our fellow citizens from excesses like these is one we can never walk away from. Our government failed in that duty, and it offers an apology to the survivors and their families, and to all the American people who must be able to rely upon the United States to keep its word, to tell the truth, and to do the right thing. Make no mistake, as the committee report says, there are circumstances where compensation is appropriate as a matter of ethics and principle. I am committed to seeing to it that the United States of America lives up to its responsibility. Our greatness is measured not only in how we so frequently do right, but also how we act when we know we've done the wrong thing, how we confront our mistakes, make our apologies, and take action. That's why this morning I signed an executive order instructing every arm and agency of our government that conducts, supports, or regulates research involving human beings to review immediately their procedures in light of the recommendations of this report and the best knowledge and standards available today, and to report back to me by Christmas.
When our leaders openly admit to non-consensual experimentation on human beings, such as Bill Clinton, now is it fair to apologize for a crime and then continue them? At least one politician anticipated this. This is Senator Joe Biden predicting a judge would have to rule on whether or not it would be constitutional to implant a human being.
Can a microscopic tag be implanted in a person's body to track his every movement? There's actual discussion about that. You will rule on that, mark my words, before your tenure is over. Can brain scans be used to determine whether a person is inclined toward criminality or violent behavior? You will rule on that. And Judge, I need to know whether you will be a justice who believes that the constitutional journey must continue to speak to these consequential decisions, or that we've gone far enough in protecting against government intrusion into our autonomy, into the most personal decisions we make. Judge, that's why this is a critical moment. There are elected officials in this government such as Mr. DeLay, a fine, honorable, patriotic man, and others, who have been unsuccessful at implementing their agenda in the elected branches. So they've now poured their energies, as the left would if it were different, they've now poured their energies and resources into trying to change the court's view of the Constitution.
As the late Martin Luther King would say, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Martin Luther King believed in the dream. It's time for everyone to wake up now in order to save the dream. And the truth is what we need to push forward. And we all need to gather across the board, all races of society. This is not an issue of race anymore. This is an issue about human beings. The right to be human. This is an issue about preserving the free will of human beings. And we ask all of you to give us your support in order to ensure that we save that dream.
Two people here, and very welcome. Mr. Jesse Beltram from California, Sacramento, and Lars Drudgaard, ours of Denmark.
Thank you. Hello, thank you.
Very welcome. Yeah, we're going to talk about all kind of technologies what is used by mind control. I think a lot of people who was hearing this for the first time, mind control, what is happening, what kind of technologies. I think first we're gonna explain and think something about that. Yes?
Sure.
Let's start with Jesse.
Yeah. Well, my name's Jesse Beltran. I'm a retired firefighter paramedic from California in the United States. I'm also the president of an organization called the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. The reason the organization was developed is we had a interesting phenomenon that was happening in the United States where people were complaining about having non-consensual implants put in their body basically without their consent. And initially it was very, very hard to believe, and I wouldn't have believed it myself until I was exposed to the technology. But basically what ISAAC.org does is we help those victims provide evidence to prove what their claims are. And the reason we have to do that is because today what's typically happening in the United States is most of the victims, when they go to their physician, as everyone is taught to do, and they explain what they're experiencing, they immediately get diagnosed with a psychological disorder, as delusional or schizophrenia. The problem with this is that, unfortunately, these are actually victims of what we call domestic terrorism, and they're just being victimized again by the psychiatric community, and it's not the kind of help that they need. So what we do is we do testing, a three-phase testing process, which involves, the first phase is a preliminary radio frequency scan with a radio frequency detector called the JM20 Pro. And then phase two is we require that the participants who strongly believe that this is what is happening to them go out and help obtain medical images in the form of CT scans, MRI scans, or high digital panoramic x-rays. And finally, the third phase is why Lars and myself are here in Belgium, is phase 3. And phase 3 is doing the testing within a controlled environment, such as a Faraday cage. And what that does is it eliminates the feasibility that this is coming from an outside source, and really dials in and says that these human beings are emitting a radio frequency, and it is not normal for human beings to emit radio frequencies. As Dr. John Hall, who's on our board, states, that human beings have the electromagnetic potential, but they do not emit radio frequencies, and so that's what our organization does. Lars, I head the United States. Lars is the regional director of the European territories, and I'll let Lars speak a little bit about how that came to be.
Okay, very welcome, Lars.
Thank you. Just like Jesse, I don't think I would completely have believed in these kinds of things and atrocities going on if I hadn't been exposed to it myself. It is so unbelievable that human beings will do this to other human beings. And the way we are brought up, we are just generally not accepting how much evil there is in the world. And to me it happened in 2009, and a while after that I got in contact with a couple of other European victims of this, and we formed an international Skype meeting. And that went on for a good year and became basically globally, and was a big success. And at one point, a bit over a year ago, Jesse Beltran came online and explained about this testing that he had uncovered in the United States by Dr. John Hall, and how the whole testing thing was going to be. And I was very interested, so I suggested if they could ship over equipment from the States, I would do the testing in Europe. And that's how we got started, basically, as an organization.
Yeah, so you have find each other.
Yeah.
And now you have find each other, and you can be stronger with one group also.
Yeah, and the thing is, in the United States we've done testing that covers basically 13 cities in the United States, and some interesting results in the statistics. What we're finding is those who are symptomatic, so those who come to us with complaints of symptoms, and we'll talk about what those symptoms may be, we're finding that around 83% of them are coming up positive on a preliminary scan for radio frequency emissions. Of that 83%, 60% are female. They tend to be isolated or widowed for whatever reason. And what we're finding is that there's another organization out there who did a national study, and they didn't do the radio frequency testing, but they just did surveys, and our results are matching what their survey results are. But we're doing a survey and we're including the radio frequency testing. And the other percentages happen to be male. Of those who are symptomatic, we're finding that 98% of them that came up positive have symptoms that they attribute to having auditory-like symptoms. So, speaking of having sounds that are transmitted that typically aren't there, and the thing was, this is hard to believe, and it sounds science fiction, but we've been able to obtain X-rays. We do have preliminary radio frequency scans. We have been able to, utilizing a Doppler ultrasound, actually record the frequency itself that's coming from the chip. And we do have some cases where they have been surgically removed. There was a politician out of Southern California whose name is David Larson, and he he fell victim to this and ended up having several removed. And then we have another case of Bob Boyce, who was an inventor out of Georgia, who developed terminal cancer, and the only way he found out that he was microchipped is he was testing some of the equipment that he works on in what's called a Faraday cage. And he was using an RF detector similar to what we use when we go out and do the testing, and found that it was going off in the cage. He thought that it was a problem with the cage. They tested the cage, it was intact, and what they realized was is whenever it was put to his right shoulder, it would go off. And sure enough, they obtained an x-ray, and you could see a cylinder-shaped object. And at this time, he said to me, he says, "Jesse, I thought I was going to die. The cancer had spread all over his body." And they removed the microchip, and it was in the middle of a tumor. You can Google his name, Bob Boyce, and type in RFID, and you'll see the images of the tumors. And in the middle of the tumor is an RFID chip, and that was surgically removed. So that was removed from him, and his cancer went into remission. And about 6 months later, it came back very aggressively, only to be tested in the Faraday cage again, and the RF detector was going off, and they found a second RFID chip in him, and they had that removed. Now, this was done covertly against his consent, and this is typically the complaint among people who are having symptoms or fall victim to this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And maybe we have to mention that it's not uncommon to be microchipped, but usually it's people who do it with consent, either for the workplace, in the military, government, police, etc. And even famous people, royalties and so on, are all microchipped in case they get kidnapped, so they can be tracked. But there's the main difference is doing it without the consent, and some of the applications that these chips have beyond localization.
Yes, something about, I think we can be a little to the details. The chip, what you said, it's using frequency. It's coming out of the chip. Where is connected with the chips?
Well, there are two kinds of chips. Actually, there's a plethora of different types of chips out there. They come in various sizes. There's a standard chip that's a little bit larger than the size of a grain of rice that we see put in our animals, our dogs and cats. That's done very commonly. And then there are those that are size of the grain of rice.
Okay, yeah. Lars is showing me an N chip. Okay, it's like a rice.
Grain of rice. And it has a microprocessor in there. It has an antenna coil, a ferrite antenna coil, and a circuit board. And there's two types. There's a passive type. The passive type has to be activated with a signal. So you send a signal to it, it turns on, and it'll send information, it'll transmit information. And then there's the type that are on 24/7. And again, these are little microcomputers, and they're sending and receiving information or data packets nonstop. So if you look at what we do with computers today, we listen to our music on bytes of information. So if you can imagine that, these microchips can do the same thing. So this is consistent, and this is why a lot of the victims do get the auditory symptoms that they complain about.
Okay, let's talk about in the normal use for the chip. You also see the animals. They give him the chip so you can read all the details about the animal.
Yes. Usually the most known type is the one that people use in their pets, and that is a passive type. It only has a serial number that when it's directed with an energy beam, it transmits only a number back to identify the pet. And otherwise it's passive, it doesn't do anything unless it's activated with an outside source. But there are, especially farming, in a lot of where pets, or not pets, but where consumer animals are bred, they use a very, very sophisticated type of chip that sends back all kinds of biofeedback, heart rhythm, all kind of metabolism, all kinds of data on the animal, so they can basically remote monitor the health condition of those animals. And those are also being developed for humans at the moment. And they have been in use for many years for humans as well, because of astronauts and other people where it's critical. They have been used, but mainly those are fully capable, and these are not passive chips. These are active chips. They transmit either in a periodically, where they send out the information with some distance of time between them, or permanently.
Yeah, so we can say from normally use.
Yes.
In one way or another, but something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But now we are talking about something different, because the chips are we talking about use an outside source.
Yes.
Yeah. And what is the outside source?
That is a magnetic field. Basically, what they contain is the types, at least, that are like this, cylinder shaped in a glass ampule. They all contain a very, very thin thread of copper wire, and if you put a magnetic field that is strong enough into it, a pulse of a magnetic field, that will generate a current in the wire, and that will power it up.
Okay.
That's basic physics lessons from ordinary school, I think.
Yeah. Yes. But
it interferes with the electromagnetic field from the Earth.
No, that's a static field. It has to. It only works if the field is changing. So it has to be a transient in a change of magnetic field that is rapidly going on. That will induce a current in this wire, and that will power it.
So in other words, it has to be a man-made transmission, radio frequency that's admitted to these chips. That's one way that they get powered up. And most of these chips operate off of 1/1000 watts, and the human body easily produces that. So the human body itself can be the battery for these, and this is why you have those that are what we call active chips that are on 24/7. Now here's the dangers to it. You know, we look at Bob Boyce's case. We look at the reports by Dr. Catherine Albrecht, who speaks out very openly and publicly against microchipping of animals, because the studies show that they produce tumors. You know, they cause cancers. So if they cause cancers in animals, it's reasonable to say that they cause cancer and ill effects in human beings. If you look at in 2011, the World Health Organization, where before were denying that radio frequency emissions didn't cause any harm to human beings, but in 2011 classified radio frequency emissions as a class 3 carcinogen. So it's the data is out there, the knowledge is out there that this kills, and it's a slow kill in most cases. Now that's in simple terms, but if you look at what we're finding with victims, not only here in the United States and here in Europe, is that there are a lot of similarities. Now, people are coming up positive on the preliminary scans at very focal anatomical positions on the body. So what I mean by that, it's not just random. It's coming at very specific locations, and for example, will be the right and left, what we call the TMJ area, which is the jaw joint area, the base of the skull, the mid-spine or mid-thoracic, lower lumbar, right and left scapula area, or your shoulder blade area, right and left shoulders, and for some reason in very, very young, fit men, we're finding emissions in the apex, which is the sternum near the heart. So those are what we're finding them. So you have to ask, why is it only in those locations? So we can take the study and put a red sticker on every location of those focal points that we find on people, superimpose them over each other, and they line up. It's not random. The only circumstances where we find a random finding is where someone has had an elective surgery. So if they had a surgery in their stomach, or a knee surgery, or a leg surgery, we're finding where they're coming up positive in those areas. They come up positive, and you ask them, well, did you have anything done there? And they say, well, yeah, how'd you know? And,
that was one of my questions also, because I thought, okay, the astronaut and the animal, okay, something like the astronaut has his permission to take a chip in it, but you are a victim, but you didn't give him permission, so how it's coming in your body. And one of the things is what you said with surgery.
Surgery is one way, but there's a simpler way, and that's just by a simple injection.
Vaccination?
All you need is a needle to put these in. You have to ask yourself, well, how many different ways are we exposed to needles? I guess one would say that vaccinations is another way. And I believe everyone else goes to the dentist at some point in their life. So it's feasible to say that that's high probability how they get put into the jaw area. That's another way.
Okay, it is in the vaccination in the also you said by the dentist. Does the dentist or the chirurg knows that there are chips in it?
Well, we do know, because a lot of this is developed through research facilities and teaching institutions in the medical field. So we do know that there are some that absolutely 100% know that this is what's happening and this is what they're doing. I like to be, I'm a retired firefighter paramedic, like I stated, and I participated in blind studies. And what a blind study is you're testing out a product or a drug or some technique to see how effective it is. And in my case, it would be out in a pre-hospital setting. Now, I know 100% that all the professionals I work with believe in what they're doing, and they believe they're helping people for a good cause. Never would they ever imagine that they would be doing something that would be detrimental or harm a patient or a person. So, that being said, there is a high probability that it could be done without the medical professional knowing what they're doing. Because this chip here is old technology.
Because it's so big.
Yeah. It's the size of a grain of rice.
Yes.
But that's considered big. They now have technology where these things are down to the nano size. We're talking the size of a grain of sand. Now, our hope is that we're finding victims who have been suffering the longest, so they have the older technology in them. Because if we're dealing with the chips or the technology that's the size of a grain of sand or smaller, Lord help us.
And another thing is they are looking into biological electronics and organic electronics. So what these chips are made of is glass and metal and silicon, of course. But some of the research that is conducted at the moment is going into organic electronics, and that really makes it virtually impossible to trace it with any kind of imaging device. So we need to expose this while the old technology like this is working. That's absolutely crucial, because in the future it will not be possible.
So your listeners know what that means when we're talking about organic technology. When we're talking about, we're talking about let's imagine taking a neuron, a brain cell, and growing it and interfacing it with an electronic circuitry. Okay, completely flesh-type materials.
Yeah.
And when you do an MRI scan or a CT scan or an X-ray, they're not going to show up. And so Lars brings up a very, very important point there. And this is why it's so imperative that we continue doing what we're doing as quickly as possible and expose these cases where the old technology has been done against the individual's consent. Because if you look at what's being, the seeds that are being planted in today's media, they're talking about putting RFID chips on on our children's clothing so they can be tracked at school and attendance. In the United States, the Obama bill, healthcare bill, in order to participate, they're talking about a class 3 subdermal implantable device being utilized to obtain biometric data that has to be reported. So in order to participate, you're going to have a chip in you. Okay, it's there. They're talking about all these positive things, but they don't talk about the negative things. And what I'm about to say now is going to be hard for people to imagine, but if you just keep your mind open for a second, ask yourself, does the technology exist? You're going to have to say 100% absolutely. The other thing you're going to ask is why in the United States we have 20 states now who have bills against non-consensual implantation of an RFID device into a human being. Okay, it's because they know the technology is there, and they know that there's a large gaping hole where this technology can be abused. Mm-hmm. Okay, they talk about the positive things about it, but let's talk about the negative things that they don't tell. What we find in our surveys, particularly because this tends to happen to women, higher incidence happening in women than it is men. Can you imagine what would happen if someone was to invade a woman's body against her consent? I think they call it rape. And if you look at the penalties for rape, they're pretty steep. And in the United States, it's a felony, and you're going to go to prison. Now, imagine if you had an electronic device strategically placed on the human body, let's say the spinal cord, where you have nerve endings that go pretty much direct every part of our body. And you send an electrical stimulation to that, you can get people to contract the muscles, elicit pain, burning sensations. And what we're finding, particularly with Dr. Hall's book, and he speaks upon this, that a lot of the women, and his book is called The New Breed Satellite Terrorism in America, and what he says is that a lot of these women talk about sexual assaults. And Lars and I produced a video, and we called it Domestic Terrorism Silent Rape, because this is a silent rape that's happening to women. And just imagine sending a remote signal and with the intent to cause harm and pain, let's say in the genitalia, because there are rare instances where it does happen to men. And imagine what it does, not only the physical torture that a woman would go through, but the psychological torture. Imagine, in the United States, if a woman is physically assaulted, particularly sexually, they gather the evidence, they have a team that's there, and they have a protocol. But what happens when a woman this is being done to her 24/7, 365 days a year? And imagine what it does to the psyche. She's crying out for help, but there are no resources out there. The only resources.
Yeah, we talk about shall we tell the listeners all kind of technologies what they're using? We said the nanotechnology we had, that the old one from the rice. What more do we have?
Well, in general, people would consider a device like this,
and we know that from movies,
Yes,
know.
Yes, you know
so
movies, so it's science fiction.
Yeah.
It's considered science fiction, but in reality, this technology is very, very old. There's through the Freedom of Information Act in the United States, where people can elicit official government documents, the whole program of MKUltra, that was the mind control program that went on, and experimentation on interrogation and drugs and so on in the 60s and 50s and 60s. Through this, there is one MKUltra sub-project called 142, and that basically details experimentation with implants in animals, is what it says. But in that same, they are trying to do a new experiment and that's going to be hush-hush, and it's going to be covered up, and so on and so forth in the document. But it ends up with saying, and these are very different than the implants we use for eavesdropping. And the interesting thing is, this document was dated in 22nd of May 1962. 50 years old. They are 50 years old, at least.
So.
Because the document from 62 references, they are different than the one we use already. So this is 50-year-old technology, and people have to realize that they have been around, and we have a lot of unwitting spies running around in society who have an implant not knowing about it, that they might not even ever feel it, but they are basically being eavesdropped, and all conversations done with this person is listened in on.
Can it also be that I have one device in me, but I don't it don't work?
Yeah. No.
Or it has to be activated, or.
Well, the device, there are a lot of people who we do some control checks. We don't just test people who are symptomatic, who complain of this or believe they have been done with. For now and then we do a lot of people who don't suspect it. Who don't think they are. Because it's important to show that not all come up positive. This is very specific, but now and then we do find them in people who have never had any complaint. And that is typically military people and other people. And what this is indicative is that they are tracked for some kind of purpose, but the chip doesn't influence them. They doesn't interfere with their life.
Yeah. And Lars brings up a good point. I was asked to do a presentation in front of a leadership group in a city south of Sacramento, and they had politicians there, religious leaders, and business leaders. And they had saw our video that we had produced called Domestic Terrorism Silent Rape. And after we were done, they asked if we had the equipment, and they demanded that we scan them. What we anticipated finding was a very, very low positive finding. But what we did find was ultimately more disturbing with regards to the percentages versus the symptomatic group. And the reason why it was more disturbing is because out of that group, 90% came up positive. Now, let's analyze this particular group. When we started to pick it apart, those who were in the military came up positive in all the same identical locations, so you can superimpose them over each other, take photographs and superimpose them over each other and be exactly the same. The next group was groups that had elective surgeries. So they came up in an unusually abnormal area. So we could take them out of the group as they've been counted. And what was left was generally these little old ladies, and they're only coming up positive in their right and left arm, or right or left arm. And then you ask them, well, what did you have done there? And they said, well, the only thing I've had done there is my flu vaccine.
Yeah. Come to me. Yeah, it's very easy, flu vaccine.
And in the United States, I don't know if they are here, the United States has telephone campaigns, telemarketing campaigns right now to come and get your flu shot for free.
So.
Yeah, I don't know what they do here in Europe, but they're very aggressive in the United States currently in getting these flu shots out.
It's about this time, here in Holland, because everybody got on the post from the doctor his card to go to take his vaccine. It's also on this moment here in Holland. So we're gonna broadcast this program next week, and also because of the flu vaccines from people.
Yeah, and we have done other interviews, and we've done some networking with some very credible people, and was one radio show Lars and I did in Ireland, and the name of the individual we were with on that show is escaping me right now. But he had documentation where a group of physicians had admitted that there were chips that were pre-filled in syringes in these flu vaccines. So this was his testimony, but you have to ask yourself, is this possible? If you look at the groups that we tested, and you have to say, okay, what are the odds of factoring everyone else out, the military, those who've had electric surgeries, and all you have left are people coming up positive in their right or left shoulder area? That's where you get your shots. You have to use common sense and say, is this possible? And I think most people will conclude absolutely. So this particular testing that we did of non-symptomatic group, we also did because we were so concerned about it. We went to one of the larger cities in California, in Sacramento, and we just took a whole bunch of just random people and started testing them, and the statistics were exactly the same.
Okay, now the big question: why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Well, I would say there's a little discrepancy between the United States and Europe. We are finding lower percentage in Europe, but still high. So we're a little bit behind schedule, according to whoever's doing this. But that, in general, that's how it goes. We're always 10 years behind the United States.
Yeah, normally. Yes. But what do you think? Why? Yeah, we call it mind control.
Well, if you look at where this was initially being tested, this was initially being tested in psychiatric facilities, and we know through the white papers, the funding in the United States, it was being tested in the prison systems. So if you can imagine strategically putting these remote tasers in people, well, what's the benefit in putting these in prisoners that way? I guess it's for
you can control them, yeah.
And I just want to point out that this is not recently. This was done in the very early 70s, where they were using technology from the 60s to do that on the prison population.
Yeah, it's okay. The news is coming out today, but it's very old. From the.
And that was actually under Ronald Reagan. They proposed it in 1973, when he was still a governor in, I think it was California, wasn't it? Yeah. He proposed the prison of Vacaville for prisoners to have those implants done, and so if they got away, they could be pacified instantly, and they could be tracked and picked up just by sending in a car, pick them up. Or they can, if they become violent, etc., inside the prison system, they could directly control the nervous system and the brain functions of the people. So that was shown and proposed as a proposal to do this. It was caused public outcry, so this was public knowledge in the area in 1973, and it was closed down. Later references have shown that it was carried out. So it was not. It was just the politician claimed we closed it down and to calm down the public outcry. But they did continue doing it. And also, what is strange is in the 70s, this all got classified and all got black. So today, there's complete amnesia that this stuff was actually known and out in the public domain in the 70s.
Yeah, but we have almost a new president, but we have Obama. Because in my thinking, it's military technology. Does the president knows about it?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
President Obama put together a panel of experts called the Presidential Bioethics Commission. Amy Gutman is the president of this commission, and they were put together to investigate whether or not non-consensual experimentation was still happening to American citizens to this day. And more specifically, it was the Tuskegee experiments, and what that was about is they were injecting males with syphilis and then allowing them to spread the disease unchecked through women, and just to see how it would spread and what the outcome would be to the victims. So this commission was put together and was supposed to investigate whether or not this was happening. In Washington, D.C., at one of their early meetings, we had 300 victims show up to speak.
On this other technology?
Yeah.
Not on syphilis?
Yeah, not on the syphilis, but about the technology we're talking about. So that's a good point to bring up, to clarify for your listeners. They gave testimony, and then every subsequent meeting, they censored, they didn't allow the victims to speak anymore. In February 3rd of 2012, of 2011, they had a meeting in San Francisco, California, and me as representing ISAACT, I attended that meeting. And the things that they were saying was rather disturbing. They're wanting to get rid of confidentiality, HIPAA laws that are in the United States, and their agenda is to turn the entire globe into a human lab. Mm-hmm. So they're talking about things like testing anthrax on pediatrics. So you have to ask yourself, okay, anthrax vaccine, so you give an anthrax vaccine to a ped, how do you test if it works? You have to expose them to it. The other things that they're doing is they're trying to obtain copyrights and patents on every human genome on this planet, okay? And so if they obtain copyrights and patents on that information, then the dilemma is who owns you.
It is unbelievable.
Okay.
It's nature and they want to patent it.
Correct. They want to own you.
Huh.
So I asked a question, and they allowed me to ask a question if I wrote it down on a card. And the question I wrote is, I understand the importance of your experimentation, but I asked, what safeguards do you put aside for the victims when things go wrong? And the case that I presented to them was the Bob Boyce case, where he obtained terminal cancer with regards to the implants. And they accepted the question. I was the only one to submit a question, and they said they would read it. And when they came to read the question, it wasn't my question. They completely censored mine and wrote their own. And this was televised. Well, why? Because you can see me handing over the card. And completely asked a different question. And I have a witness to this because I have horrible handwriting. I had the person who was with me dictate and write it. And she has the question still written down in the pad and dated that she wrote. So here's where we're at with things with the Presidential Bioethics Commission. They were supposed to give their findings January of 2012. For whatever reason, they decided to postpone it until after this next election.
I would actually like to make a comment to bring this home to Europe. And right now, in Europe, there are very evil forces out there trying to propose that any human being who is rendered unconscious can be a legal test subject. So that means if you are found unconscious in a car accident or whatever, you just fall over unconscious, then you are legally can become a test subject. You could be implanted, you could be, anything can be done to you. But that has to be seen in how easy it is to render people unconscious. You can actually do it just with radio waves, microwaves, light waves. You can render people unconscious so easily. So this is basically just saying we can do it, make anyone a test subject of anything we like. We basically just need to render them unconscious for a moment, and that's it.
Okay.
And this is actually in Europe, in progress. And I know there are groups out there protesting it, and I think that it's worthwhile raising the issue while we're here in Brussels.
Yeah, that's why we can talk about why you are here this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
But first I want to know about the attacks.
Yeah.
Because I know Melanie, she said van, yeah, but they can attack me. What's happening when someone is, when you have an attack, when something that's out of your body tries to interfere with your body? What's happening?
Well, I think if you go to our website at www.icaact.org, you can look at the video that was produced by Lars for ICEACT. And it was an exclusive interview with Dr. Barry Trower, and it's called 30-Minute Update. And in that video, he explains what exposure to radio frequency can do to a person. And he talks about it specifically manipulates people in very negative ways. You can cause depression, suicide. You can cause irregular heartbeats. He mentions a bunch of different anomalies. He mentions a specific case where the United States consulted him when the special forces returned from Afghanistan, and there was 5 wives that were beaten, and some of them were killed by these soldiers. And the United States asked Trower what frequencies caused this aggression, and he says, "Don't tell me, I'll tell you." And what had happened is subsequently those soldiers were being accidentally exposed to these radio frequencies, and it was entraining their brains to violence and being very aggressive. Now, if you look at what's happening across the globe, these new communication systems are being implemented everywhere, and Trower predicted what the end results would be, and more specifically would be increased aggression amongst law enforcement. And I don't have to say much there. You know, it's out there in the media. That's exactly what's happening.
Maybe you just have to clarify who Dr. Barry Trower is.
Mm-hmm.
He's a former British military microwave weapons expert and a former British agent who interrogated foreign spies, etc., on this technology issues.
Interesting guy.
Yes. So he does have a lot of knowledge on the technology, how it's used, and what it's capable of. So
yeah. Yeah. Well, before we take this interview, yes, you told me you all in the last few weeks you also lost 5 people about this through this technology.
Well, typically what happens is because there are no resources out there, and what I mean by that, there is no help. Mm-hmm. There is no group or clinic or hospital that you can go to that can help you with this and has a treatment and a solution to stop the torture. So what happens is a lot of people will end up giving up and committing suicide.
Mm.
And in some cases, I think most recently, there was a gentleman, he is a bioengineer major, or electrical engineer major, along that line. He's a very highly intelligent individual, and he came to Europe, and Sean, yeah. And he did an interview about his experience being a victim. And part of that, in that interview, he talked about how utilizing this technology through radio frequencies, that they're able to cause cardiac arrhythmias, so irregular heartbeats. And if you do it at a perfect time, what you can do is cause the heart to go into cardiac arrest. after he did that interview, after returning to the States, approximately 4 weeks later, he died in his apartment of a heart attack. He was only 44 years old. And most of these victims are in their 40s that are succumbing to this.
Well, that's also unfortunately suicides, as you mentioned. But the rate of suicide, that is a part of the, let's say, from going covert to overt with the technology. Usually one part of the system of that is to force the victim to commit suicide. It's basically becomes torture to a degree where they force people to it, and there's nothing the victim can do. If you complain about it, you will get institutionalized, dropped, or fried to oblivion. So they will have their way either way. So if you go public and say anything about it, you will be fried, have your brain fried, or being dropped in a mental institution somewhere. If you go secretly, they will do it. So, and that's what also one of the things, a lot of people have them covert. They will never affect their lives, but at some point they can be activated to basically eliminate people.
It's something like you always be in a state of fear.
And there's actually a lot of cases, especially to signal intelligence, in the NSA and the British, where there's a lot of spontaneous suicides. People all of a sudden say they hear voices and then they commit suicide instantly.
And Trower speaks on this too, and he says what scientists would call a success is to methodically and utilizing a protocol in a very organized fashion against someone and getting them institutionalized or labeled as crazy. That was a successful outcome. And Trower testified to this. And he's, what's great about Trower, he's a patriot for humanity right now. And as far as I'm concerned, he's a hero because he's coming out and he's telling the truth. The other thing that, with regards to that, he also says that scientists today are getting away with what scientists during World War II, what they were doing, they got hung for. And that was the Nuremberg trials.
When I talked with Melanie, we talk about the vaccinations, but she also told me they spread it out, the nanotechnology with the chemtrails.
Well, what we don't know yet is whether or not these are separate experiments that are trying to be covered up with some other technology. We don't know if it's the actual technology. We know it's different types of experiments that are going on because they're most definitely artificial in both cases. But we don't know if one technology is used to cover up other experimentations or if it's the technology also is capable of it.
But more specifically, it's not something that we're tackling right now. What we're tackling is about finding objective evidence, objective data, so that victims have something tangible, something you can see, touch, feel, hear, and be able to present it to the professionals, so where they can't turn their backs, and then that's where we're at.
That's maybe also the point where we want to go to why you are here this weekend. And can you say something about what you're going to do this weekend?
We talked about the different phases that ISAC is involved in. What we've done this weekend is we've had victims that have come up positive in previous scannings from the United States, London, Spain, here in Belgium.
From all over the world,
Sweden, all over. We're actually putting them through phase 3, which we're doing the testing in an isolated environment, so where we can narrow down, and say without a doubt that this is coming from the human body, and we always try to be the devil's advocate, because in the preliminary scan you can always say we live in a wireless environment and there's a lot of radio frequency pollution. Although we minimize that in our preliminary scan by calibrating the scanners down to where you have to really be on top of the emission most of the time in order for it to come up positive. So what this phase 3 does is basically helps prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these are the findings and this is the controlled environment, and it's in your face now. The other thing that helps them, for those victims who maybe didn't have anything show up in a medical image, such as an MRI, CT scan, or an X-ray, if they come up positive in the preliminary scan and come up positive in those locations in the controlled environment, you can then say, okay, this is outside the realm of medicine because this is about technology, and most physicians aren't taught about these things in medical school. And I can give a prime example. I had dinner with the chief radiologist from the Sutter Hospital System in Sacramento, California, and we showed him the evidence that I showed you earlier, and when he looked at it, his jaw dropped open, and he says, we're not taught about this in medical school. I would have read this as a normal MRI scan. He goes, but now I have to rethink everything. And whenever someone comes to me with the complaints that you talk about, I have to consider that this is a possibility. Okay? So this is some of the things that we do to create a positive outcome for those victims, so they get help and resources, and hopefully don't get put into the system with psychological diagnoses, or those who have been diagnosed and put into the system, that this is a way to say, look, you should have looked at something else first besides just jumping to a psychological diagnosis and taking the easy way out.
It is 1 for 12, eh? Because what you said, because if we can't prove it now, we can't prove it in the future, and then we were first up behind.
I unfortunately have a very bad case from Denmark. It's about 1 month old and to 14 days old, basically, where a Danish victim was scanned by ISAC, came up positive, and then felt comfortable to go to the police, or the family felt that they were comfortable enough to go to the police, and they did not want to look at the scanning. They did not want to speak to me or anyone else. They thought this, okay, if you complain of these complaints types, we have a protocol. So we will call in a psychiatrist. And they did that. Again, the psychiatrist does not want to listen to other people, investigate the claims, if there's any basis to it. And he was committed against his will. And even there, when he was given sessions with a psychiatrist, he basically, the psychiatrist claimed out, directly, well, these are the complaints you made. I have to diagnose you like this and this. I don't believe you, and I don't have time to investigate it, whether or not you're telling the truth. And then this is the case. They have 10 minutes to decide on people's lives without investigating whether or not they're claims.
And we know this is fact because he took our advice and used an application that allowed him to record it and retransmit that recording to a remote location, so someone else can have that evidence in case he gets further victimized with drugs and gets to a comatose state where he can't plead for himself. So that's why we know that to be factual. The other interesting thing, and I'll let Lars touch on that, is this particular facility has been known and associated with a company that works on a specific drug for a specific purpose, and I'll let Lars elaborate on that.
Well, the company is generally one of the biggest medical companies in Denmark. They do a lot of different types of drug, but the most notorious one is the one that is used for executive action style things in the
Execution for euthanasia.
Yes.
For euthanasia.
Yeah, that's the drug, the company. This facility is very closely linked with this drug company, the pharmaceutical company. They're doing a lot of tests with them. And we found that, of course, very scary. Then the company with that name and reputation. And then doing... But you have to realize most of those psychiatric are basically research facilities. They are very, very closely linked. But just to take it on a positive note, I just want to end this on a positive note.
Yeah.
Last week we have received requests from medical doctors who have patients complaining of this, actually investigating and asking us, can we see some evidence? Could you help us in directing us towards whether or not I can prove this is right or wrong before I make up my mind? And that's where we want to go. That's what is really needed, and that is very, very encouraging. I think.
We've had Lars representing ISA Act, did a presentation in Denmark at the Open Your Mind conference. Dr. Barry Trower was there, other leading nanotechnologists, biologists, and other experts in cane was also there. It was received so well that, and again, this is to the general population. There were victims there, but it's being received as credible. This is factual, and we're giving the actual incidents and the cases and the programs and the documentation that this exists. So this month, here in October, Lars has been asked to do another presentation in Norway. And what's great about this particular case is that he'll be doing the presentation in front of physicians, psychologists, NLP experts, and some of those are from the United States. So it's a huge opportunity.
Yes. Yeah, because we need the critical mass also in scientists. So from, hey, what's happening? And that group has to be growing. And then
we first of all need those few physicians who are willing to investigate
yes.
claims.
Okay, yeah.
Hopefully to prove the claims and bring that forward in the medical and psychiatric community, that this is going on and investigation needs to happen every time.
And this is huge, because typically I don't think there's been any other organization out there that has been successful to get this opportunity to be in front of the professionals that were saying, look, you need to take a look at things differently. You can't just jump to a psychological diagnosis, and that's psychiatry. And I would challenge any psychologist to this. Show me a blood test. Show me any objective finding that says you can prove that someone is delusional or is schizophrenic, because there isn't any test out there. There is no EKG, there is no EEG, there's nothing out there. I'd like to weigh that up against what we're producing, objective findings in the form of video, or our statistics, and we're moving into phase 3, and we have certain cases where we're actually having a surgical removal. So I put that up against their psychological diagnosis any day, hands down.
Have I forgotten to ask you one question? Was that's very important the listeners has to know.
What do we need to do? What does society need to do? Basically, we need to wake up. Everyone needs to band together, and not just in Europe. I'm talking globally, because this is a global phenomenon that's happening. And if you look at what the end result's here, if we do nothing and we lose our rights, our freedoms, and we're delving into an arena where the last freedom that you identify as being as human being is starting to be taken away and chipped at, and that's your thoughts. Now, when that's taken away, and that's put in shackles, and that's in handcuffs, what are you? You're nothing but a slave. So if this is the future that you want for your loved ones, your children, your children's children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, then keep doing what you're doing. But if you don't want that future, you need to wake up and you need to band together, and we need to make sure that we're bringing this to the media, to the general population, to your ministers, to everyone. And we need to do something yesterday, not today.
Okay. And I hope this broadcasting will help you also with that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
And I wish you a lot of success with all the things.